And so it is of course, at every meeting at every conference we've been discussing Iran. I know Mark has been made a great effort to renew the panel each time so that we get a different perspective. So it is with a very, very great pleasure that we welcome all three speakers. They will speak in the order of the program. So we will first have Daryl Kimball from the Arms Control Association, who's the director of the Arms Control Association. Then we will have Professor Abbas Maleki from Iran, and finally Bruno Tertrais from FRS. So Daryl, the floor is yours. I guess as we see that there are many questions and reactions in the room, I will ask you to stick your remarks to about no longer than 10 minutes so that we can have the conversation with the whole group, as there are many specialists in the room. Daryl.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to have been invited to speak to you on this very important topic this morning on the EU's role in a solution regarding the Iran nuclear issue. I agree with recent statements by the incoming EU High Representative Federica Mogherini and Lady Ashton that an agreement between Iran and the EU 3+3 within the next few weeks is within reach. Both sides have been negotiating seriously. Just a few days ago here in Brussels, as you know, Lady Ashton and Foreign Minister Sharif met yesterday. Mr. Sharif and Ms. Mogherini met in Rome. And within the hour, the United States and Iranian teams will be meeting in Geneva for a bilateral meeting. So both sides have been negotiating seriously, but big gaps still remain in some areas. And in order to succeed, both sides are going to have to work a lot harder to see creative trade-offs, particularly on what many of us believe is the toughest issue, defining Iran's uranium enrichment capacity in a comprehensive agreement. The EU's role is absolutely critical. More than ever, Lady Ashton and her EU team are going to have to skillfully coordinate the private positions and the public messages of the 6 foreign ministers and their governments over the next several weeks of talks. In addition, I think it's very important for the EU team, with support from the UK, France, and Germany, of course, to be even more prepared and active in putting forward some of the creative solutions and trade-offs that can lead to a win-win outcome. In my view, at this point, we're past the original July 20 deadline. Neither side can afford to double down on their original maximalist positions on some of the key issues. All sides are going to need to recognize that they're not going to get everything they want on every issue, but with skillful compromise, they can get what they need on the most vital issues. This is going to be even more difficult because of the publicly articulated red lines that have been set out by hardliners in Tehran and in Washington. And if there is going to be a deal by November 24th, the Obama administration is going to continue to have to hold off the efforts of some hardliners in the U.S. Congress who, with the midterm elections approaching, are calling for unrealistic terms for a nuclear deal with Iran because it plays well with their core supporters and campaign donors. And equally important, the Supreme Leader and President Rouhani cannot afford to allow hardliners in Tehran to reduce their negotiating options or to make provocative statements on the nuclear issue or other issues that might strengthen the hand of hardliners in the U.S. Congress. So let me just outline very quickly where things stand from my perspective as an independent, non-governmental observer who has had some conversations with some of the principals involved in the discussions over the last few weeks. It's quite clear that in the previous rounds of talks leading up to July 20th, the two sides did make substantial progress on several key issues. It appears as though the two sides reached a basic understanding on strengthening the IAEA's inspections authority to guard against a potential secret weapons program, They seem to have general agreement about the pace and framework for sanctions relief over the course of the Comprehensive Joint Plan of Action. They seem to have general agreement about the idea of modifying the Iraq heavy water reactor to drastically cut its plutonium output once it's constructed. And of course, they also agreed that Iran need not enrich uranium to levels above 5% fissionable uranium-235, and that the Fordow enrichment plant could and should be limited to a research-only role, though there's not clarity about what exactly that means. But they obviously could not bridge their differences on one of the core issues, the overall scale of the enrichment program. And in the last few days of the talks, it's my understanding that the two sides were still unhelpfully focused on the sensitive issue of centrifuge numbers to the exclusion of other important variables. And this is going to have to change over the course of the next few weeks. It's clear that the EU 3+3 have been pressing hard for significant long-lasting reductions in the overall number of centrifuges and a virtual halt to all enrichment, I should say advanced centrifuge research. But Iran's leaders are still under heavy pressure to reduce the country's reliance on foreign energy suppliers and to maintain a uranium enrichment program that could be expanded if and when its nuclear energy needs grow. So how do the two sides square the circle? I think that the negotiators can get to yes in a number of ways, and we've been working with a number of colleagues, including the International Crisis Group and some colleagues who are here in the room, on some ideas that could help bridge this uranium enrichment divide in particular. And we put forward just in the last couple of weeks, we, the Arms Control Association and the International Crisis Group, a food for thought formula that would increase the time Iran would require to produce enough weapons-grade material for one bomb if it were to choose to do that in the future, but still would provide Iran with a more than sufficient capacity for its civilian enrichment program, civilian nuclear program, for a period of 11 to 16 years. And there are copies of a white paper we put together out on the table, also available on the Arms Control Association and International Crisis Group websites. So some key elements of this proposal, and I'd be interested very much in the comments and thoughts of my fellow panelists and those of you in the audience about some of these ideas about how to deal with this very difficult core issue. So one element would be to reduce Iran's current enrichment capacity by about half for a period of about 3 to 5 years. Current capacity, 9,400 separative work units, combined with a reduction in the size of Iran's enriched uranium stocks. This would increase the time it would take Iran to produce enough weapons-grade enriched uranium gas to roughly 9 to 12 months. Iran's operating enrichment capacity under our proposal could return to current levels by about 2021, and for the duration of the agreement, either to 2025 or 2031, but only if Iran can demonstrate that it has discontinued any experiments with possible military dimensions. Another key is going to be to limit the working stockpile of low-enriched uranium hexafluoride to perhaps as low as 200 kilograms, and to convert any excess into an oxide powder that is more proliferation resistant. And I can discuss how that powder might be dealt with in such an agreement. Another key is going to be to remove and store under IAEA seal most of the IR-1 centrifuges now installed, and to replace over time under the SWU cap, the 9400 SWU cap, a smaller number of more advanced IR-2M centrifuges. And research on machines that are even more advanced could be allowed but regulated over the course of the agreement. And this would allow Iran to make the desired shift to more cost-effective machines as its uranium enrichment needs grow, but still constrain Iran's overall enrichment capacity until international confidence is restored about the nature of its program. And of course, it will be important under this formula or any future formula, the P5+1, the EU 3+3, and Iran agree to provide stronger guarantees to Iran to help meet its future energy needs, including possibly the pre-delivery of fuel for the operation of the Bushehr reactor beyond the 2021 date, which is when the current fuel agreement between Iran and Russia is due to expire, but it could certainly be extended much longer than that. And in addition, the IAEA could, after 2021, begin a technical assistance project to help Iran develop the capability to produce the fuel for the Bushehr reactor, something that it is not currently capable of doing. So that is a very quick outline of some ideas that we believe need to be injected into the conversation. An agreement along these lines would not deliver everything each side wants, but we believe it would deliver what each side needs under the current political and technical and security circumstances. This would, in our view, be the type of win-win formula that both sides can and should embrace, but it would require difficult choices in the weeks ahead. Thank you.
Daryl, thank you very much for offering us not only an assessment of where we are, but some policy recommendations that will lead to our debate. Let me now turn to Abbas Maleki for his presentation. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and many thanks to 4 prestigious think tanks, European think tanks, which made the EU Non-Proliferation Consortium. I am following the Dr. Kimball discussions and also the topic of this session, which is what is the role of the European Union in Iran's nuclear talks. I want to raise a few questions about this topic, and then we will discuss more in questions and answers. The first question would be regarding Iran voices optimism recently about the final nuclear deal before November 24th. Question is, what does Iranian decision makers think about joint plan action and final deal? What would be the best for them? The second question would be, should it possible to do comparison among official proposals which have done from 2001 until now, and some of them, it is very interesting that the Iranian side had some changes in its position and its behavior. The third question would be, are there differences between U.S. positions, behavior, and proposed scenarios to European Union or not? I think yes, U.S. added penalties recently, last week, different companies and the different few individuals in Iran. This is very important for Iranian decision makers. And what can we propose to EU to do? This is the main point which I want to talk about this. And what Iran should do, this is another question. And finally, what is the impact of Iran nuclear fight to Middle East and West Asia? As I know, regarding the question first, I think Iran's civil nuclear program has a clear economic rationale because Iran has a need to generate more revenues from the sale of the fossil fuels. Second, Iran's insistence on controlling its own enrichment process is the logical consequences of the diversification and energy security policy, in addition to its aim to establish technical independence. This goal is itself fully within the limits of nuclear Non-Proliferation or NPT. And the third, as made clear in assessment by U.S. intelligence services and joint U.S.-Russian Track 2 assessment in the past, Iran's decision to pursue a military nuclear program is ambiguous. And the fourth is Iran leadership reject the double standards on nuclear violence. These are issues which politically, Iran believes about this case. But what is the case of differences between U.S. and EU? I think U.S. thinks it is better to do a detente with Islamic Republic of Iran because of the case of pivot, the rising of the Sunnis, hardliners, and terrorist groups in Islamic world, and many other issues. But at the same time, the United States doesn't want to withdraw about sanctions which has imposed by decree of Mr. President or by Congress as CISADA and ILSA in the past and other issues. But Iran's relations with European Union is totally different. Iran had relations with European Union and European countries from 400 years ago, but recently after Iranian Islamic Revolution, first Iran had critical dialogue with European Union, then constructive dialogue during Mr. Khatami 1997 to 2005. Then European Union and Iran agreed to sign TCA, Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and also Iran was going to be part of Energy Charter. Suddenly, all of these issues has changed, especially during Mr. Ahmadinejad, and Iran believes the best way for Iranian side would be immediate sanction relief from European Union, because European Union is more concentrated on the imposing sanction or relieving them than United States, which is Congress, the executive administration, something like that. Iran is eager to have access to frozen assets, especially in Europe. Given Europe comparative institutional freedom to pass and implement decisions, it should consider creative options for providing an economic package to Tehran, which many foreign ministers, which they were in Tehran, Iranian decision makers, they were talking with them. And the major issue, which I think is lifting oil embargo, permitting European oil companies to come to Tehran, to Iran. This is very important for Iranian side. During these days, which we are from last year and after the election of presidential election and President Rouhani, Mrs. Ashton, Lady Ashton, had many visits from Tehran. She discussed issues with Iranian President, Minister for Sharif, and also with some people that we are talking here as they are in the right hand or something like principalists, like Dr. Velayati, who is the advisor of Iranian leader, and something else. Foreign ministers of Italy, Austria, Belgium, Greece, Latvia, and parliamentary delegations from Poland, Spain, Slovakia, and Sweden, foreign minister had meeting with Iranian foreign minister in Tehran, and parliamentary delegations, British, German, and French parliamentary delegations has been welcomed by Tehran. These are issues that Iran is looking to European Union, especially looking to European Union on this case, when and how the United Nations sanctions would be removed. This is very important in Iran because the American side, they don't want to discuss about this case during the meetings. And the case also, the resistance against secondary effect of United States sanction to European countries also is very important, because many banks and companies had been received penalties from United States. Nobody knows what is the legal basis of these issues. Doing some regulations to the case of the U.S. court decision imposing penalties on some Iranian assets in United States, some embassies, properties, something like that, because of the, for example, killing one lady or one girl in Tel Aviv and other issues like that. Anyhow, this is the case that Iran is going to talk with European Union, and the case of the WTO, which Iran believes in 2006 Iran was going to go to WTO, and that was part of the European Union commitment to Tehran. And the case of, I want to talk about what Iran should do. This is also very important. I think Iran should be patient. This is the most important part of the politics in Middle East, because when you are facing different pressures from the various lobbies in United States, in European Union, especially non-governmental actors like UN, United Against Nuclear Iran and something like that, the best way to be patient and resume the talks, as Iran's leaders and also Foreign Minister and Mr. President, they reiterate. Working with EU and European countries at the same time. In Iran, when you are in Tehran, there is a body as European Union. There are many countries, 28 countries, which they have different views in the case of especially economic ties and financial energy ties with Iran. Therefore, Iran prefers now to have bilateral relations also with European countries. The case of domestic issues is very important in Iran. Despite of all of issues which now we are talking about, the case that President Rouhani is going to handle the negotiations and talks, I think we must look at inside of Iran more properly. The other part, the right or principalists, some people they are talking here as the hardliners, they are not very weak now. Recently, during these weeks, they gained some new positions. One of them, which is very important, is the case of the expert assembly, which some people they believe that maybe former President Rafsanjani will be the head of expert assembly. The meeting, which was finished yesterday, they reached to the point that Ayatollah Mahdavi Kani would be as chairman, despite of his situation, which is in hospital and other issues. The second issue, which is very important, is the City Council in Tehran. City Council was, the chairman of City Council was Mr. Masjid Jami, who was Minister of Guidance during Mr. Khatami. But yesterday, strangely, the new vote, Mr. Chamran, who is in the principalist part of political arena in Iran, he became the chairman of City Council, and his deputy also is one of the principalists as Mr. Talai. And the case of these are many issues that shows that without compromise or without talking with the right wing in Iran, we cannot do anything. The last point which I want to say, the case of 190,000 SWU, which Dr. Kimball also mentioned, I think it is an opportunity for European Union and United States in P5+1 talks. In the past, the Iranians, they insisted on the volume, the amount of the centrifuges. For example, once they insisted on 100,000 centrifuges, another time 60,000. Now they are talking about 190,000 SWU or separative work unit. It means that this is a signal which Tehran wants to say the amount, the digit of centrifuges are not so important than the case of the outcome of the centrifuges are more important. Iranian leader clearly said within 5 years, after 5 years, we want to reach to 190,000 SWU output of the machines. It shows that maybe it would be 190,000 centrifuges, maybe it would be 20,000 centrifuges. It is related to the case of technology. And I think it is an opportunity to talk about this case more with Tehran. The case of the technical issues also is important. The most important technical issue for Iran in nuclear file is human resources, because as I am teaching in Sharif University of Technology also, there are many engineers on energy policy, energy engineering and others. Some of them, they are working in nuclear technology. This is very important for Iran to have access to work with the different part of the nuclear technology in pilot and also in the case of industrial. Thank you very much. I have some other issues that in questions and answer I can talk about them.
Thank you very much for sharing the perspective from Tehran. Bruno, you're last but not least, and you won't have the last word as we will continue the conversation. But you're the last speaker.
Yeah. Thank you, Camille. Let me start first with a couple of words on the context, on the general political context. I think there are currently what I would call two symmetrical fallacies in the debate on the connections between the Iranian nuclear issue and other regional issues. The first fallacy is an old one, is to believe that a satisfying deal would improve dramatically the bilateral cooperation between Western countries and Iran on other issues. I don't think that would be the case. First of all, it is precisely because the nuclear issue was insulated, including by Tehran, including by the new president, insulated from the rest of other difficult issues, that the negotiation was, that we have reached the point where we have the GPA and implementing the GPA. And by the way, it goes further than that. If there was a deal, I think that several countries, in particular the United States, would feel for various reasons, international and domestic, that they would have to be at least as demanding towards Iran on other issues of contention. So I think that's one fallacy. The other one, which is a more recent one, is the symmetrical one. It is to believe that bilateral cooperation on Syria, on Iraq, or perhaps on Syria, I don't know about that, would improve the chances for a deal. Well, I think that first of all you have to differentiate between cooperation and convergence of interests. The fact that there is a convergence of interests does not necessarily mean that you need to cooperate and that you will cooperate. And so far, at least, the US and Europeans
have separated things, and I think they will continue to do so. So that's a word of context on these two symmetrical fallacies. I'm less optimistic than the two other speakers. I wish that deal was within reach. I'm not sure it's the case. I think we should all appreciate the very good work done by the Arms Control Association, by the International Crisis Groups and other which have tried to give a contribution to what could be an acceptable deal. This is very useful. But I do think that at this point the positions are too far apart on the main issues. Where I disagree with many analysts who work on these issues, perhaps because I work less on these issues and I'm not immersed in them as much as I used to, is that I don't think that this is a matter of finding diplomatic solutions to technical problems. I don't think that the number of and type of centrifuge is the major issue. I'll get back to that in a second. I actually agree with Mr. Maleki that using the SWOOS criteria is a useful one. I actually defended this approach some time ago. If my calculation is correct, and if the IR8 centrifuge is indeed a 24 SWU machine, I think you would need only something like 8,000 machines. That's not the 50,000 we used to hear about. But we could dwell on the 5 to 10 issues that are on the table. There is a text, there are brackets, there are a lot of brackets. But I think that the enrichment issue is not the main question. I think the main question is a fundamentally political one. Does Iran want to maintain the option to build the bomb in a short to medium time frame? Enrichment is not the main issue. The Netherlands enrich uranium. We don't care. Well, we care because they're our friends and they make uranium. But we don't worry about them getting the bomb. There's a reason for that, okay? So I think this focus, this constant focus on enrichment sometimes detracts us from the main issue. And that is why I think that the main issues are verification and what is called PMD in the agency's language. Verification because we will need, according to the agency itself, more than the additional protocol to ensure that mutual trust and confidence is restored. And PMD because without a significant effort, I'm not asking for full, complete disclosure of all past activities. I think that's a bridge too far. But at least much more than Iran has been willing and able to give the international community, I think without such an effort at openness, which would in turn demonstrate that Iran has changed course, that the supreme leader has changed course, has made a choice that he is giving up the option of building a bomb in the short to medium term. Without this, I think a deal is unlikely. And again, let's not forget that this is the bigger picture, not the number and type of centrifuge. I'm not saying that number and times don't matter. I'm saying that it's, in relative terms, a secondary issue. So my bet for the coming 1 or 2 years is, well, it's topical given what's happening in Wales today. I would call them the 3 no's. No deal, no bomb, no military action. That's my bet for what's most likely to happen in the next 2 years. The problem, however, if we keep negotiating and negotiating and negotiating, and if the GPA or GPOA, whatever, is being, or if we have another GPA, or if it is carried on for another year, is that the longer the negotiations drag on, the more they risk being exposed to some external factors, a black swan, as they say. Remember, for instance, that's the classical example, what happened when the SALT II agreement was signed. Then a few months later, the invasion of Afghanistan happened. And the treaty was dead. Again, we've been fairly good, both Iran and P5+1, at separating things. Will we always be able, whatever happens, to separate things? I'm not entirely certain. So there is a risk in continuing negotiation for forever, so to say. I'm also troubled by the fact that those who focus on technical issues seem to consider that this is more or less an arms control negotiation. This is like the United States and the Soviet Union negotiating an arms control treaty. Well, it's not arms control, and it's not two parties. It's non-proliferation, and it's Iran versus, I hate to call it the international community, but after all, there are several UN Security Council resolutions relevant to Iran, and the P5+1 embodies very imperfectly the international community. So this is not an arms control negotiation where you do try to find middle ground on more or less each issue. This is an issue on which, as the GPA says, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So what happens now? I think if you go beyond my 18 months and my 3 no's for the next 18 months, I think you have at least 5 or 6 scenarios. One is a good final agreement. One is the interim deal forever, which is North Korea all over again. A third scenario is a breakdown of the talks, which, if the pressure on Iran continues, may lead to a slowing down of Iran's program. The fourth scenario is a breakdown of the talks, but then Iran, for whatever reason, decides to accelerate this program. Then it leads us to a very bleak scenario, which may include military action by some countries. My fifth scenario is the black swan, the one I can't predict, the one you can't predict. Well, maybe you can, I can't. It's the one that we haven't thought of. A dramatic event that happens somewhere in the world, in Iran, in the region, somewhere else, which has a dramatic negative impact on the negotiation or on the agreement. The sixth scenario, by the way, let's not forget that the Iranian supreme leader he's not a very old man, but his health is not reportedly the best. And what happened when he disappears, I think it's very difficult to predict. It could make things worse for the negotiation. It could make things better for the negotiation, but that's part of the parameter. And once again, the longer the negotiations drag on, the closer, just because of time, just because of the passing of time, the closer this hypothesis I'm no privilege to any kind of technical information or intelligence about his personal health, but it's a common sense remark, so to say. As far as Europe is concerned, as far as the EU is concerned, as you all know, the EU has had 2 very different roles on the Iran negotiation. A leader in the initiative in 2003, a leader in the sanctions in 2010. Some of our American friends tend to forget that, but I think that there was European leadership, and that in the sanctions that were mentioned earlier on were probably important in nudging things. But the EU, as you know, has also its role as an intermediary, which is a very useful one, and kudos to the outgoing High Representative, Foreign Minister. She has played that role very well, at least over the past 2 years. What I think is interesting regarding the EU is that Iran has made non-proliferation part of the EU's foreign policy DNA, and that's not going to go away. That's important for the future. I was trying to think, and I'll conclude with this, I was trying to think whether we can imagine other issues, other crises, other problems where the EU could have the same kind of role. I haven't found any. I mean, an issue where Europe can be in the driving seat and be one of the main actors, but it's a global issue. It's an issue as important as Iran is today. So far, I haven't found it, but maybe you will in the discussion. My last word would be to say that if ever, heaven forbids, if ever the talks broke down, I would not want the EU to have its own Sonderweg. I would want the EU to continue to cooperate very closely with China, with Russia, and with the United States. I think it would be an extremely unproductive idea for the EU, in case the talks break down, to try to go its own way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. So thank you all three for your excellent presentations. I'm sure you will, in the course of the Q&A, also want to respond to each other on some issues. But let me turn to our speakers. I will maybe for the to get the debate rolling, take the questions by a couple. So Tarja Kronberg was first, and then Maurizio Marcelin. Martin.
Thank you. My name is Tarja Kronberg, and I led the European Parliament's delegation to Iran in December, the first in 6 years. And I would like to, on this basis, I would like to ask two questions to David Kimball. One is dealing with the question of if there is a deal, and I think your proposal together with the others is very balanced and interesting, but on the other hand, I agree with Bruno Tertrais that this is not only a technical question. So the question is, will the Congress approve of it? In Iran, the parliament in December was very dominated by the hardliners. There was a very negative feeling about approving a deal. On the other hand, the Speaker of the Iranian parliament has recently said that the whole Iranian parliament supports a possible deal. What is the situation in the U.S. Congress? Would a deal have a chance to pass in the U.S. Congress, and what is the situation right now? The second question to you is that if there is a deal, will your or any other's suggestion be a model for future non-proliferation management of countries that aspire to nuclear technology? And if there's no deal, what will be the consequences for the NPT? The review conference is only 8 months away, so if you have any comments on this. Thank you.
Maybe we take Maurizio and then
Yeah,
I'll give you back.
very short. Firstly, congratulations, Bruno, for your excellent presentation. I mean, I'm a scientist, a nuclear scientist, and of course, exploding bridge wire detonator or sites of separation working unit or plutonium, perhaps for non-scientist people, are also, let's say, in case of judgment. However, in order to have an operative nuclear power deterrent, you need political willing, you need organizational system, you need human resource. So I think that at the end, the most probably solution that I advocated in track 2 meeting that my organization done many times with Iranian official is a sort using, reparaphrasing Bruno expression, is sort of interim plus negotiation. So personally, as a nuclear physicist, I think that you can agree any kind of number usually put on by the political scientist, and perhaps you can do on November 24. But the point is, after this date, to follow a real constructive path of scientific and technological cooperation. In other words, it's mandatory to establish a mechanism of verification and monitoring, additional protocol plus, and to convince the Iranian, for instance, to accept nuclear swap, to accept even after the end of Bushehr. And this can be done if you, I'm very convinced on that, it can be done under the current Iranian leadership if you give this saving phase, and you can easily agree on the on the number that Dr. Kimball put on. This is my point of view.
I think I'll take one last question, and please, gentlemen in the second row. Please introduce yourself. I can hardly see, so I don't. There are faces I'm familiar with, but I don't want to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kayhan Barzagar. I am an academic based in Tehran. I have one comment, and that comment is about the best role the EU and Iran in bilateral relations can play, and that is to build the trust in the domestic politics of both sides. I don't know if you are following currently or not, but currently the distrust about the U.S. role is growing in Tehran, and at the same time the confidence about the EU role is growing in Tehran. As Professor Maleki mentioned, this is because of the visit of foreign ministers of the EU countries. Therefore, if there is going to be no deal between Iran and 5+1, I think the EU can play the best role in terms of building trust and continue the talks, because this can be in terms of convincing the domestic politics of the Iranian politics to go ahead with the negotiations in the context of 5+1. Or the second issue is about the regional cooperation. I believe that it is unlikely that cooperation happens between Iran and the U.S. because of the historical past, a lot of ideological constraints, and at the same time the interest of the regional allies of the U.S., like the Israeli regime, and at the same time the Saudis in the region. Therefore, I think the EU has a role to play in terms of converging cooperation between Iran and regional issues. Therefore, I think in two matters, the role of the EU is significant. One is the post-no-deal situation, and second is regional cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn back to the panel for, don't feel obliged to answer all questions, but pick up whatever is you feel like.
Thank you. To answer the first couple of questions about what the likely U.S. congressional reaction to a agreement on November 24th or shortly thereafter might be, it's difficult to gauge. I think the vast majority of members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, strongly support a diplomatic outcome. But there are many different views about what a good diplomatic outcome is. There's a lot of, to be blunt, lack of understanding about some of the core issues. There's not a widespread appreciation for the value of stronger inspections, Code 3.1, the additional protocol with respect to dealing with the potential secret program in the future. There's not a good understanding of what it takes a country like Iran to amass sufficient amount of fissile material to make an actual nuclear weapon, and not just 25 kilograms of UF6, which is enough if further enriched to build one nuclear weapon. So with that in mind, I think an agreement that achieves a so-called breakout potential as measured by the amount of time it would take Iran to theoretically produce enough uranium hexafluoride gas for one bomb, if that were stretched out from the roughly 3-month time frame it technically could take today to at least 6, if not longer, months for a substantial period of time. That would help achieve a great amount of support in Congress. Now, support for what? Congress does not have to approve this agreement, but Congress does have a veto on changes to the sanctions legislation. The president can, over the next couple of years, waive a good number of the sanctions that Iran is looking for relief from. And there are some of the underlying laws that will expire in January of 2017. So Congress would have to take action to overturn the agreement. And I think it would be very difficult for members of Congress to overturn an agreement that has substantially reduced Iran's capabilities for a substantial amount of time, achieved greater amount of IAEA inspection authority, helped to resolve the PMD issues in favor of what? In favor of a military course, more sanctions. So I think that Congress could and will, in some cases reluctantly, but overall would support the kind of outcome that I was trying to describe in the brief amount of time I had, and that is described in more detail in our paper. Is this a model for the future? I think that's a subject for next year's conference, if we have an agreement. That's a very big question. But I would say that, we've gotten this question about the Syria CW mission also. It's not a precedent because some situations are unprecedented. This is an unprecedentedly complex negotiation. No, Bruno, it's not just a simple arms control negotiation, but there are some similarities in some ways. But I don't think we're ever going to see a similar situation. And I think one thing that will be clear if there is an agreement is that no country that is contemplating a civilian nuclear program that could be used for nuclear weapons is going to want to take the path that Iran has taken, because Iran has suffered tremendously. And I think the overall example is one that should turn countries away from pursuing a similar course in the future. So in that sense, if there is success, I think it will be a helpful precedent, but it won't be repeated exactly like this again.
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you. Regarding your question about the Iranian parliament, really, I don't think we can say most of them they are hardliners or extremists, because in other issues, sometimes when you are talking about economic affairs, financial issues, encouragement of FDI in Iran, this parliament, they are working and they are deciding rationally with the tendency to the private sector and other issues. The case of nuclear, as you know, you have been in Tehran and therefore you know, this is the case of, in Iranian point of view, this is the case of discrimination, because maybe you know also that in United States, the most well-educated minority, they are Iranians. In all of the university, you should see many professors and others from Iran. They are working in mechanical engineering, in solar energy, wind, exhaustible resources, and the world, as you said, international community agrees with all of them that Iranians, they can do that except nuclear technology. Nobody can accept this case in Iran. Even Iranians in abroad also, they don't agree with this case, despite of the fact that they are opposing to Iranian Islamic Republic system. But in this case, they say that no, because this is part of energy, and energy, I don't know nuclear energy is in renewables or not, because also this is discussable. But anyhow, nuclear energy also is like other energies, and Iranians, they have studies in the past in MIT and other prestigious university, and they know this technology. For this case, I think Parliament, but majority of Parliament, they believe maybe they must look at the talks carefully, and dependency over the talks to other part of the Iran society, they believe it is not very sophisticated. For example, when you are talking about industries, some people say that we are waiting to see what would be done in Geneva or Vienna, and then industries also would be better, or in agriculture, in trade and others. This is the most important case for Parliament, that why the inefficiency in industries would be related to the nuclear talk. The other issues, I agree, and I think we can work more, especially with European Union. With United States also we are working, but really I don't understand what is the hierarchy in United States administration. The Assistant Secretary of Treasury really, he will follow the decree of Mr. President, and Mr. President or the Secretary of Treasury told him that you must do sanction against Iran. It is totally different with the behavior of Mr. Burns, Secretary Kerry, and Mrs. The Wendy Sherman. When they are talking with Mr. Zarif and his deputies, they are talking that really we want to solve this problem, and we try to prevent any new sanction and something like that. But suddenly, and all of us, we know that these sanctions, the new sanction, doesn't have any impact on Iran, because those companies and those people, they are not very important, and it doesn't mean that Iran would be suffer very hard in this case. But the political or the intention of this case is very important.
Thank you. Bruno?
Two very quick remarks. First of all, Maurizio, I didn't mean to disparage the importance of technical and scientific details. In fact, there's nothing worse than a French intellectual telling you that everything is political and that technology and facts don't matter. And on the contrary, I'm not French at all on this particular. And I don't think, I have a PhD in political science, but I still don't know what political science is or whether it makes any sense. So, thanks God for scientists. Thanks God for the Lando Network, Centro Volta, for Pugwash, for all these institutions created by scientists who have done some extremely good work with Iran and other countries, of course, but to ensure that we understand each other a little better. On the interim plus ID, your main point, I think it could be the least, in some scenarios, in many scenarios, it could be the least worst option. It could be the least worst option and or the path of least resistance. I mean, many things in life take the path of least resistance. But that could be okay as long as it does not allow Iran to make covertly or overtly some significant progress which could make a deal more difficult. So, but the concept of an interim plus deal is certainly not the worst possible scenario for the coming 2 years. And just a very quick comment on what Kayhan Barsagar said. The United States has alliances in the region. Europe has alliances in the region. Whether it's a good idea to have these alliances is a different matter, but the UK and France have alliances with the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar. So the US is not the only ones to have alliances in the region.
Just a quick. Do you want a two-finger? But let me then we'll go back to the.
Yeah. Just a comment, Bruno, on what you just said about the possibility and the value of an interim plus agreement. In other words, extending the joint plan of action for another 12-month period. The political scientist in me, and I'm a political scientist by training, by the way, says that is not an outcome that the President Rouhani wants or can afford, nor is it something that President Obama can afford either. I don't think there's the political support for that. I think they're driving hard to get a comprehensive agreement by November 24th. And I think that what we all have to think about carefully is what is a good deal? What does that mean? And I would just remind us that, this negotiation can't solve the fundamental question of whether Iran is someday going to want to pursue nuclear weapons. I just don't think it's possible to decide that for future leaders. This negotiation can create limits on Iran's capabilities so that it is technically more difficult for Iran to pursue that path, and it is easier for the international community to quickly detect and disrupt any such effort if it pursues it in the future. And that is fundamentally, I think, a good outcome. That's how I think we should be looking at this. We have to be careful not to expect that Iran is going to announce that we will never pursue nuclear weapons. We were pursuing nuclear weapons. We're making a decision now and forever. It's just not something I think this negotiation can can produce. So, and I think that this next several weeks is absolutely critical because neither side can afford the continuation of the existing JPOA because of political circumstances in each capital.
Bruno, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. First of all, my understanding of when Maurizio talked about the interim plus deal is that it's not just a reconduction of the interim deal, okay? I understood this as being interim plus. So I took it in Maurizio's meaning, not in Daryl's meaning. And Daryl, just a quick question, just for the fun of it. You're saying that neither Obama nor Rouhani want an interim plus deal. But I hear you. But what if the alternative was the breakdown of the talks? That's like, you think they would reject it? I'm not sure they like it. The question is whether they would reject it. That's the question.
Okay.
We have plenty of questions, so let me try to bring you on board as a by bunch, and please keep your remarks as short as possible so that I can bring the about 17 hands that I've seen in the room. So first I have Sidhu, then Bernd Kubik, then Eli Levit, and then I'll turn back to the front rows for the next round. Sidhu.
Thank you. A brief comment and a question. There's perhaps a third fallacy as well in trying to insulate the whole discussion in the nuclear deal from the broader politics of it. And that is, and we've seen this in other instances as well, on the side of perhaps the West, or if you like the P5+1, the potential that you may have a regime change in the process of these negotiations. On the Iranian side, there's perhaps an equal fallacy that you're going to see an overstretch on the part of the West, which will again, and this has happened in the past, 2003 is a good example, which will again, get them off the hook. So in some ways, that's a fallacy which is also likely to drive the process of these negotiations. The specific question I have is really on, is it in fact possible to try and keep the negotiations narrowly focused on the nuclear issue? We've already, and none of you talked about this, but there's been references to looking at Iran's missile program as well. And to what extent is this likely to complicate the situation further? Or is it in fact crucial to look at that even as you look at Iran's nuclear program? Thank you.
Thank you. Bernd?
Thank you very much, Camille, and thanks for the three informative presentations. I think the challenge is, or the opportunity is, that we do have a framework, and the negotiations, and we should be supportive in that, should focus on this framework and take it as an opportunity and see what one can do with it. This is a new situation. And I think the challenge for both Mr. Obama and Mr. Rouhani is to deliver in due time. And here is, I think, where, first of all, a positive and constructive role of the EU can play a role. And this regards especially the relationship between the EU as a confidence builder with regard to Congress, especially after the midterm elections, which may be an additional problem. And that means the fact that the EU, all members have their embassies in Iran is a comparative advantage, and one should make use of it in terms of activities, lecturing or at least instructing members of Congress, and reduce what I hate to call the culture of hatred in the Congress majority towards Iran. I think the challenge and the opportunity for the EU is, because it has stringent sanctions vis-à-vis Iran, is to step in when Mr. Obama's cannot do the job, and that is really try to go and introduce real relief of sanctions that I think will help Mr. Rouhani. I see a space for learning on both sides. And I see some progress in that respect. 5 points. First one, secure the results. There have been results in the talks. Secure them. Secondly, build on them. Be transparent and don't be maximalist. Try to build on compromise. And my last point would be, and especially also a special role for the EU regards countries, skeptics like Israel, Saudi Arabia. Here again, the EU can play a constructive role by instructing those countries what is going on. And maybe the result of the exit strategy is to see the big trade-offs that are possible between inspections on the one hand and the amount of centrifuges. So I think with goodwill, the EU should and can play a very constructive and instructive role. Thank you.
Thank you. Eli Levy.
Yes, I want to broaden the nuclear debate here on Iran and bring in the EU in on 2 points. But first, let me say, I think it's a dangerous equation of President Rouhani and President Obama. Rouhani has nothing to do with the deal, and in fact, trying to put him in the context of the deal would actually make it more difficult to secure one because of Iranian politics. We have to focus on the supreme leader. He's the one who's spoken out to put out the limits and so on. But to broaden the discussion here, 2 issues. First, I think that the genuine problem we have is the peaceful character of the program. And the issue that I think we have focused least on is what would it take to make the program look like a normal nuclear energy program. Give you one example, which opens a whole series of issues. Every single country around the world that operates nuclear power plants is a party to the Convention on Nuclear Safety. The only country in the world that has operated the nuclear power plants without being party to that convention is Iran. If Iran were to join that and then have an independent regulator, safety, and all of those things that go along with with a really nuclear responsibility culture in the civilian domain, would go a long way to convincing us that what they actually want to do in enrichment in other domains. And I think there is enormous opportunities for Europe to help Iran actually develop a credible nuclear energy program that is indeed for energy purposes. So that's one issue. The second issue that I think we focus too little on is the broader implications of Iran deal for other nuclear aspirants that are looking at Iran and saying, okay, if Iran is allowed to do certain things, notwithstanding dubious credentials, where does it leave us? And so I think we need to focus real hard on the attributes of the deal, not just for purposes of making sure that Iran doesn't acquire nuclear weapons, but in the context of solving one problem, we open another can of worms. Once again, I think that the focus on the genuine attributes of a nuclear energy program and how those are met in safety and security, in liability, in other domains, in ethics, would go a long way towards reassuring us that when someone says there's peaceful, it is indeed peaceful.
Thank you. Maybe we'll go in a reverse order for quick responses. Bruno?
Yeah, first of all, to policy views, 2 additional fallacies. I would call them illusions. I think in the fallacies there is a causal relationship which is different. But I agree with you. I would call your fallacies illusions. But I completely agree with you. That doesn't make things easier. On the missiles question, I think that the US Congress is pushing too hard on this. And clearly, giving the impression to Iran that after several years of negotiation, you have a, oh, by the way, moment, what about the missiles, can give those Iranian officials who really want to deal, and I don't doubt that there are some who really want to deal, a very negative message. So as much as I would like to have a deal which is as comprehensive as possible, to insist on taking into account the ballistic and other missile program of Iran in that negotiation, I think, for me, is largely a non-starter. The only thing which does have to be taken into account one way or the other is the dedicated tests are, I mean, there are certain things that you can do on the third stage, nose cone, you know, whatever is in the final stage, that are just too useful for putting a nuclear weapons under it. So that's a very confusing way, and I apologize for that, to say I don't think that it's possible to suddenly add in a new category of negotiating issues, which is ballistic missiles. But I do think that a comprehensive deal would have to ensure that that we have the ability to monitor Iran's hypothetical, well, and not so hypothetical capacity to design and test re-entry vehicles that can be easily adapted for a nuclear type payload. Yeah, and on Ellie's question, yes, thank you for making things even harder than they are, but you're absolutely right, absolutely. Because I want to reinforce your point. Whatever happens, deal, no deal, bomb, war, whatever happens will have far-reaching consequences on the NPT, on the agency's work, on the IAEA's work, and on regional security. And I think the verification issues in particular are extremely important in terms of what this means for the IAEA's future ability to verify the peaceful nature of a nuclear program. But, you know, that's because time is running out. But I can't develop this. Many of you here could do it better than I can. But Ali, you're absolutely correct here.
The case that you mentioned, the talks would be better to narrowly be only on nuclear issue. This is the request of Iran. For many times the Iranian negotiators, they are talking, and they have done this request to do, because sometimes they are talking about a sanction, something like that, even UN Security Council resolutions. Then the other side says it is not because of nuclear issue, it is because of missile program. Sometimes in European Union discussions, sometimes they say, no, this sanction is related to the violence of human rights in Iran, and many other issues. Therefore, I want to say that the ambiguity of the origin of sanction and purpose of sanction also, this is part of the problem and part of question in talks. Anyhow, Iranian leader has ordered to Iranian negotiators, they can talk only and only on nuclear issues, because American side, they prefer to talk about the regional security, the situation in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and other issues that Iran doesn't want to talk about this case in this stage. This is first issue. The case of the EU, you are right, EU has, and European countries, they have comparative advantage, and they can do that. And the JPA, Joint Plan of Action, also has many results. We want to secure these results by goodwill. And the case of the focus on leader, I think it is not true that in Iran all of issues is related to the Iranian leader, and if Iran, as my friend said, that he is ill, these are issues that Ayatollah Khomeini had more charisma and charismatic situation in Iran, but when he died, it was not happened anything. This is a system. Yes, in this system, leadership has a specific position. But I don't want to say it is not, I cannot forecast in future, but I want to say this is the a collective decision-making that in the nuclear issues and nuclear talks, we must do this case, this trend, this way of discussions, not only Iranian leader. Normal nuclear technology, Iran is eager to do that, despite of you mentioned that in all of the countries the nuclear technology is in private sector and others. As I know, in India, Pakistan, Israel, this is not true. Even it is not in government, it is directly related to the military sector. But in Iran, it is not directly in military sector. It is the head of atomic energy, Iranian Organization of Atomic Energy, is the vice president, who is Dr. Salehi, who is professor of modern physics from MIT. Anyhow, it is also negotiable that to Iran to join to that convention you mentioned. We can discuss more, and I can tell to Dr. Salehi your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Darren?
A couple of points on a couple of questions quickly. On the question of how the negotiations are going to deal with the missile issue in the UN Security Council resolution, language on that. I agree with my colleagues here that this nuclear negotiation is not going to affect new limits on Iran's ballistic missile programs. I think it's just politically not in the cards from the Iranian side. If you look closely at Undersecretary Wendy Sherman's comments to Congress when asked about this, she pointed out that probably the best way to deal with the possibility of nuclear-armed Iranian ballistic missiles is to make sure that Iran is not nuclear-armed. In other words, a solution through a comprehensive agreement relating to Iran's nuclear program is the best way to deal with that particular regional security concern. I would also point out that another approach that needs to be pursued regarding ballistic missiles from Iran, as well as others in the region, are regional approaches to ballistic missile control in the region. It's an area very ripe for that concept, and that's something perhaps the EU can help the countries in the region think about and explore in the future. I agree that we need to think about how this agreement creates precedents for the future, perhaps better and good precedents for the future. I would just point out to you an article in the current issue of Arms Control Today by Tariq Ralph and Robert Kelly about verification issues relating to Iran. They propose a concept for verification of Fordo and Natanz, Iran's two enrichment facilities, that are better than current safeguards for enrichment facilities elsewhere, and that could be a useful precedent in the future. So we need to be looking at the negotiations in that regard, and I would encourage you to take a look at Tariq and Robert's suggestions in that piece.
Thank you very much. Ambassador first, please.
Thank you. And thank all the speakers. Let me add, I will constrict my points to two observations. One of them is the fallacies that you have talked about. You know, progress on one issue will help resolve issues of the region, Mr. Tertrais. And I would say that we may add also another sub-fallacy, and that is the ability of the Iranian team being able to deliver so far on some issues that they can deliver on other issues. And I think this has proved to be wrong when it came to our discussions on Syria, when the Iranians were not able to commit themselves to the plan, to the UN plan on Syria. The other thing I want to address is that of the impact of the program on the region, the Gulf region. And we have talked a lot about that. We are concerned in the Gulf region on the safety question in particular, because we know that the security question is being taken care of internationally with this negotiating team. We have urged Iran, as previous attendance, was previous speakers said, to accede to the safety convention. We have been assured repeatedly of the safety of the program, but I think that should be put in legal terms, and that is, although this is voluntary, the agreement. One other point that I would like to say on this things is that the problem of glorifying nuclear weapons, I think that is basically where we have a problem in all of our discussions. We glorify them so much that everyone wants to belong to the club, whether it is India, Pakistan, and Iran. It's a question of prestige. You know? So everyone rushes to be there. How can we de-glorify that aspect of state status so they can be humbled and become normal like the other states? Is that why Iran is pursuing that program? Obviously not, because they need the nuclear energy in their economy mix. But the problem is that Iran casts a lot of doubt on all international efforts that would streamline these guidelines for peaceful energy. And I recall their objection to the fuel bank when it was first discussed in the IAEA. And I think, more proactive involvement with these issues would allay the concerns of the countries in the region. They turned down the international one, Sam Nunn's, the Russian proposal to have that fuel bank, complete ownership of the fuel cycle. And that is what caused us a lot of concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela Kane.
Thank you very much. I have a comment and I have a question. And the comment is, first of all, that there was a bit of talk about double standards and lack of transparency and mistrust. And I think that there is something to that, because the one thing that we have is we also look at the peaceful character of the program. I think you, Bruno, mentioned that. And you said if the Netherlands, for example, used it or enriched, we wouldn't be worried. But if Iran does it, then we would be worried. And I think that is something that's very dangerous, because there is something that is an interpretation or an assessment that comes in. I would feel more comfortable if at the same time I would see, for example, an encouragement of those states that are currently outside the NPT to join the NPT, because verification, after all, would establish a regime that would be applicable to all. And right now there's some countries that are outside of it, and I would therefore like to see an encouragement, and I don't see that. At least it is not evident. Now, my question comes back, and that goes to Daryl Kimball, because it goes also about the U.S. sanctions against Iran as well as the Security Council sanctions. I just wonder, considering the current situation in Congress, how do you actually see the situation when it comes to an agreement? And it was stated several times that the agreement would be a give and take on both sides, meaning not everyone, not each side can get what they want, but however, you have to make some concessions. So my question, particularly with the U.S., is how amenable would Congress be to actually accept such an agreement, which would mean not everything that they're putting on the table, particularly since there's also talk in Congress about adding additional sanctions to the current U.S. sanctions regime. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring the last questions. Please make them very brief, because I'm under strict instructions to allow you to have lunch. And that would be very un-French of me to move you directly to the afternoon session. Salome Zorabichvili, please.
Thank you. I want to go after this last question on the question of sanctions, as the coordinator of the UN panel on sanctions. I think I'm more optimistic than Bruno, sorry. And I think that we are going towards a deal because of many reasons that have been already stated here. But we are going to have a bumpy after deal period, and namely because of sanctions. Because those sanctions, as has been said, that there is an expectation on the part of Iran that the sanctions are going to be lifted immediately and completely, because those sanctions are linked, in the case of the UN, to many other things, and we have already mentioned ballistic missile, but there is also arms exports. So the question of lifting at once these sanctions is going to have to be discussed, and it's not been discussed yet. And the question of coordination between UN, US, and EU, which of course is not going to be an official coordination, but the coordination of how, when these sanctions can be lifted and how that can accommodate the expectations of Iran, again, in the case of a deal. So I think that we have there some field that is cleared and tested for the time being.
Thank you. Carlo Trezza.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with Bruno Tertrais that the political environment counts, and there I see a situation where we have, let's say, a reasoning leadership in the United States. We can more or less say the same thing about the Iranian leadership right now, and I believe that the incoming High Representative of the European Union will have a balanced approach to this issue. So the atmosphere is rather conducive to a positive result, but it may not last, this conjuncture. Therefore, of course, as Mr. Maleki says, we have to have patience, but we have also to grasp, the present situation, which is a positive one, and we don't know how long it will last. I hesitate to enter into the technicalities, but I think that I agree with Ariel Levit that the Iranian nuclear programs, its civilian nature should be credible. And here, I'm somehow surprised that they have not invested very much in the fuel production capability. It is strange that they are unable to produce the fuel for the Bushehr power plant. Should we encourage them to burn as much enriched uranium as they can as one of the solutions to the enrichment program? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Emanuele Farrugia from Italy, and I'm interested, of course, also in the dynamics of negotiations. And I was very interested in the scenarios that were explained, were illustrated by Mr. Tertrais. And I would like to remind there is another negotiation going on with the dynamics which is independent from the P5+1 negotiation with Iran, but is closely interconnected. That is the current talks between Iran and the IAEA on the possible military dimension. So we are very much hopeful that there will be a positive outcome before November, and on the track 5+1 plus Iran track. But still, the core of the issue remains the possible military dimension, because if there had been no concerns about the possible military dimension of the Iranian nuclear program from the very beginning, we wouldn't be in that situation, basically. And also because after the report, or 2011 report, and the resolution of the Board of Governors of November 2011, this question have gone unanswered. So just imagine, I suppose that it is not time maybe for Iran to deliver on this issue before cashing in on an agreement in November with the P5+1, and this can explain the delay in answering the questions of the agency, also missing the deadline of 25th of August. But what are the scenarios? Maybe suppose that we have a deal in November, as everybody of us would like very much to happen, and then there is, okay, Iran admits, or just there is not a full disclosure, but a solution where we come to a convincing an explanation, and then the final outcome, let bygones be bygones, and if everything is fine, or another outcome that can be deal in November, comprehensive plan of action, and lingering questions. Also because the possible military dimension, I would like to remind, is not only about the past. In the report of 2011, the agency was quite clear in saying that, yes, it was over past activities, but maybe some activities are continuing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now I would ask my panelists to help me follow my interim deal with the conference organizer in trying to meet the deadline and not to have to extend the interim deal. So you have each about 1 minute to pick up whatever you want from the last round of questions.
All right, very quickly. If there's a deal by November 24th, and I think the odds are better than 50-50, the difficulties are not over. There will be implementation issues, as a couple of people have said. Will Congress support the kind of agreement that might be possible in this negotiation? Probably. All right, and I say that because there's some members of Congress who believe that the deal should be better than I think good forecasters would predict it can be. They are looking for limits on ballistic missiles. They're looking for Iran to come clean on the possible military dimensions issues, whatever coming clean means, and they're not very specific. Some want zero enrichment still. Some want the time frame to be as long as possible, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. These things are not going to happen, okay? But I think what they're going to realize is that the agreement that could come if the negotiators are creative, if the negotiators are bold, if they take the small risks that are going to be necessary, is that the agreement is going to extend the amount of time that it would take Iran to amass fissile material for weapons. It will improve safeguards, and we're in a much better situation than shunning that agreement and allowing Iran to increase its capabilities without restriction. So I think in the end, they're going to look over the cliff and they're going to realize that they don't want to be the party that has disrupted the implementation of this agreement, the waivers that are going to be necessary. And on that PMD issue, just very quickly, it is crucial that this is resolved. Iran has been responding more slowly than they need to or should to the IAEA's questions. I'm not surprised, however, because Iran has said for some time, it continues to say that it wants certain issues to be closed off in the PMD investigation before it moves on to others. And that's what's happening right now. Second, this investigation is going to go on beyond November 24th. It can't be rushed. The IAEA needs time to pursue all the leads, to pursue all the questions. But it's clear that Iran is not going to get the sanctions relief benefits that it's looking for until and unless certain PMD benchmarks are met. So it's going to be hanging out there. There will be questions for some time. This is going to be a process of months, years of rebuilding trust on the nuclear issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Syria, really, I don't want to say that Iran's position was totally right, but anyhow, Iran had a classical diplomatic position to respect to sovereignty or territorial integrity of Syria, despite of the fact we know that the government of Syria did many other issues. But nobody talks about United States, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey. They created a problem for all of the world. Daesh was born in Syria, and it is not only Daesh, many other groups, Jabhat al-Nusra and others. This is very important that sometimes you have some goals or some aims that you reach, for example, to democracy, but the result would be something totally against democracy. The other issue, which is on verification, I want to assure my friend, all of the installations in Iran are under the control and surveillance and monitoring of IAEA. Even Fordo has a lot of cameras which they are recording all of the activities, and experts come, and you should see the report of IAEA. The case of sanctions should be lifted totally. Really, nobody believed it would be happen. If you remember in 1994, Armenians, they attacked to Azerbaijan territory because of Armenian lobby. They added one amendment to U.S. budget every year. In 2011, it was annulled after many years, 8 years. Therefore, Iranian sanction, yes, it needs a lot of time, I know. The case of unable to provide fuel for Bushehr, Mr. Ambassador, they are able and they are doing. Even they have produced 20% for Tehran research reactor. But we have Iran has a contract with Russia, and it's better to do that. On PMD or possible military dimension, really it is also very vague. Some people, they believe that water also has a dimension of possible military use because it can cool some missile systems or nuclear issues and other things. Therefore, PMD, if it would be very clear which is PMD, yes, Iran is ready to talk about it and to reach to a compromise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bruno.
Okay, very quickly, 4 quick points. To Madam the Distinguished Kuwaiti Ambassador, I think you're absolutely right. If President Rouhani called the General Soleimani of the Quds Force, and I think the answer would be, I'll take him later. Or, I'm not even sure he has his mobile phone number. So it is a system, but certainly things like the Quds Force, there's almost certainly the exclusive privilege of the Supreme Leader. More seriously, to the points made by Angela Kane, the status question is one of these questions which is extremely difficult to solve, and I'm coming from France. But I think that for Iran, the status issue was more driven by what they're. Let me make a hypothesis. The emergence of India as a nuclear power, and then as a recognized nuclear power, even if it's not a member of the NPT, was probably something that was very important for the Iranians in their perception, right or wrong as it may be, in their perception of what it means to do certain things and be sanctioned by the US and then 10 years later to get a nuclear deal with the US. I'm not saying that their perception is correct, but I strongly suspect that the Iranian perception of India as a nuclear power is not a completely trivial dimension of this status issue for the Iranians. I have absolutely no problem with your idea of, I don't know if I characterize it properly, but to do something, to have, if it's the issue of having it in the agreement, we strongly encourage, we urge all countries non-member of the NPT to join a treaty. I have no problem with that. I realize that, and that's the second hypothesis I'm making this morning, if a country is democratic, nuclear, and openly nuclear, it's even more difficult to reverse than other nuclear programs. So paradoxically, I would be ready to argue in a longer conversation that opaque nuclear proliferation is easier to reverse. But that would require a longer conversation. And finally, on the question of Vienna and the PMD and the discussions with the IAEA, I could not agree more. Last year, when the Geneva Agreement was signed, I think I remember saying something like, Vienna is almost as important as Geneva. What happens in Vienna is almost as important as what happens in Geneva. But I would just refine my argument in half a second by saying that it's not only about the PMD, it's about other issues that you know well, such as having a uranium enrichment program which did not have at its onset any economic rationale, etc., etc. It's a number of other things. Apologies for having a bit too long.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all three speakers and all the panelists of this morning to giving us a very good start for the conference. You're invited to lunch at the restaurant, which is right on your right-hand side in the corridor. Please join the breakout sessions at 4:15, 4:20 sharp. 2:15, yeah, 2:15, I'm sorry. 14:15. 2:15 sharp. Sorry for that. Please join